Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, I guarantee you, we're going to have a conversation that's going to change your perspective, your point of view on a lot of different things. We're going to be talking with Mark Walker. And Mark is not only the co-founder and CEO of Revved Up, but Mark, you have been a 4-time CRO in charge of revenue operations. You're a startup, you're a founder, you're a CEO. You've got, in the company that you have right now, you do a lot of consulting with other chief revenue officers and CEOs in about their revenue operations. So from your own background in B2B and then working now with a number of different companies, it gives you a very broad perspective on best practices. And particularly in the area of our topic today, which is why B2B lead nurturing hasn't changed in the last 10 years. We have new sources of data we've never had before, right? We have new technologies we've never had before. We have best practices we've never had before, but we tend to lean back and default on the way that we're used to doing things. And I think a big part of that is breaking through the status quo. But before we dive into it, I just wanted to give you a chance to expand a little bit more on your background before we get started.
All right. Thanks, Steve. I appreciate the warm introduction. Great to be on the podcast. Yeah, as you said, my background is over the last 10 years, I've been a chief revenue officer. So helping drive overall revenue for businesses, which means running and aligning sales and marketing, as well as CS, account management, revenue operations to drive those businesses forward. Prior to that, I've always been involved in commercial teams, and perhaps somewhat unusually, I've crossed over the divide many times between sales and marketing. So my background has always been a near equal balance between sometimes taking quite operational marketing roles, sometimes quite operational sales roles before becoming a chief revenue officer. So it's given me a really unique perspective between those, what can often be quite siloed disciplines. I think almost evenly 50-50 between a sales and a marketing mindset, which I think has given me quite a unique advantage in a lot of the roles that I've taken on. And as you mentioned, more recently, I'm now a founder and CEO of a VC-backed tech startup, which is a whole new learning curve that I'm really enjoying. And prior to that, getting off the ground, I was consulting and advising a number of different startups and growth technology businesses.
From that description, it sounds like we should have you back on because we have ongoing series on why B2B CMOs and why B2B CROs fail so quickly. They're the two shortest tenures in the C-suite, but I think we're going to unpack a little bit of that, some of the reasons behind that today. Let me just have you dive right in. The topic was why B2B lead nurturing hasn't changed in the last 10 years. Why is that the case?
Yeah, we were speaking a few weeks ago about the changing landscape in go-to-market and technology revenue. And I just happened to mention this idea that 12 years ago, I was head of growth at Eventbrite. And more recently, the last 3 months or so, I've been diving quite deep into what hasn't changed with different revenue leaders. And one of the things that has come very evident is that the way people lead nurture has not changed in the 12 years since I was leading growth at Eventbrite, which is just absolutely crazy, right? We've had so many advances. The whole playbook around go-to-market seems to have been ripped up and rewritten what feels like every fortnight at this point. And yet lead nurturing is exactly the same as it was 12 years ago. So the question is why? Why is this area of go-to-market being completely untouched? And I've got my hypotheses. So I think one reason that lead nurture has simply not been worked on to any great extent is that people are quite obsessed with filling the top of the funnel more and more, right? They look at, hey, we need more opportunities. So they work up the funnel and they go, okay, if we need more opportunities, we need more SQLs. If we need more SQLs, we need more MQLs. Therefore, we need more leads. And then they skip the bit in between that, which is why don't we just get those leads to MQL in a more efficient and effective way? And why don't we get more of those MQLs to turn into SQLs, which is a story we'll dive into in a minute. They skip right to the top and go, we just need more leads. Spend more money. We need to go to our trade shows. We need to spend more on LinkedIn. We need to spend more on PPC. So I think one is that default mindset of we need more leads to drive growth. Okay, more is more. And that means they skip what feels like quite an easy win with lead nurture for those reasons. A second piece is that actually until pretty recently, there's just not been any new technology within lead nurture. So your marketing automation platforms, HubSpot, Marketo, Pardot, Eloqua, the big four, they've been around for over 10 years, sometimes 15, 20 years. There's been no new players in the space, right? Almost no new innovation within marketing automation. So there's been a lack of innovation and technology to drive new thinking and new capabilities within that spot. And then I think the third one is it is just impossible to get away from. Sales and marketing misalignment means, again, often people are not focused on improving their lead nurturing. They're running around with their heads on fire, trying to generate more leads, or sometimes playing more political games, which is maybe a subject we can touch on a little bit further in the podcast.
I'd love to. And I want to get into that MQL, SQL conversation. Before that, though, you mentioned that we spend the vast majority of the time trying to go after new prospects, get new MQLs, new SQLs. But just last couple of years, Forrester came out with a big report. And they said in the world of B2B, 73% of revenue, 73%, 3/4 of revenue comes from existing customers. So I just want to ask your question about, as a revenue operations leader, that doesn't mean, revenue operations over new logo development. That means increase our revenue, right? And the more enlightened companies have chief revenue officers that oversee revenue operations. So marketing and sales and customer support, customer experience, all live under that umbrella. So the structures are maybe tending towards that. They're not that way in most companies. But why are companies so focused on new logo development and not as much on mining the massive opportunity we have with our existing customer base?
Yeah, great question. I've been on the board of other fast growth VC-backed businesses as a CRO, and I can tell you it is largely driven from the top, right? It is driven by a board that they rarely ask the question of how much revenue are we driving from our existing base, right? They want to know, what is our future pipeline? That's the question that you as a CRO get beaten over the head with. Where's our future pipeline? Where's our new logos? That is the predominant occupation or interest of boards, right? Now, it doesn't mean they don't care about things like churn and net retention, but they care more about new logo growth, right? Because that they see as the engine of the business. And if you flatline on new logo growth and completely rely on existing business, your install base, then I think, to be fair, rightly, if you go too far that direction, the business will eventually stall. There is only so much you can eke out your existing customer base. And actually, there's a really great guy in the SaaS space called Jason Lemkin, who I admire greatly. He's spoken a lot about the last 12 months. Too many SaaS CRO leaders have actually gone the opposite direction, and they are squeezing every penny or every cent out of their existing customer base to the detriment of existing client relationships. So I think we may be overcorrecting to that route at this point, but I think traditionally, Steve, you're completely right. We've just ignored our existing customers. Like, they just don't matter when there is an enormous amount of value and revenue to be driven out of those existing customers. And of course, the expense of trying to replace any churned customers with net new customers, it's like you're treading in quicksand, right? Like, you do not want to be building a business on a leaky bucket.
I love how you positioned it, like within the board meeting setting, right? Which is from leadership at the highest level on down. If you come into a board meeting, right, and we're not talking about this quarter's quota and what next quarter is looking, everybody's like itchy. They're like, what are we doing here? If you come in, you start talking about, here's our customer expansion program. And from a marketing perspective, here's how we're building the brand, because today's brand is tomorrow's demand, which everybody knows, right? And these are like really solid things that we should be talking about at the board level. But you're going to get shot. That is one way to have a failed board meeting. At least you got to know your customer and their needs, and that's what they want. But to your point, they want us to be leaders in our own businesses. They are advising us to execute. I think all these areas they have to have focus on. But I want to come back then to this focus. So let's go back to the new logo development. And let's go back to the MQL, SQL conversation and what you wanted to get into there.
Yeah. So I think there's a fundamental disconnect in the way businesses treat lead nurture. And it comes from often this misalignment between sales and marketing and how they value a lead. Okay. So typically, marketing are driven towards a target that's primarily MQL based, right? The way that they define an MQL is very frequently based on a numeric behavioral metric. And by that, how many times did they open the email? Did they read this white paper? Did they go and visit the pricing page? So it's a behavioral driven mechanism. Now, the problem with that is it does not layer on whether or not that lead is a good fit for the business from an ICP perspective, an ideal customer profile perspective. So historically, and I do think marketing teams are starting to change this, but if we talk historically, many marketing teams would race as fast as they could to generate as many MQLs as possible. Volume was the game. And sales would go, what is this? I can't sell to these. They're not within our ICP. And so I won't be able to give the exact quote, but someone I was speaking to a couple of weeks ago, they said almost inevitably, the sales team would rather go and run their own cold outbound because they know they're reaching customers that they can sell to than spend time on inbound MQLs because they don't believe in the quality of them. Now, you then go to the sales side of things, and they can be also really difficult because they expect an MQL to be ready to buy. And that is not what an MQL is, right? Like sometimes you get these overly privileged sales teams who reject anything that they don't practically have their checkbook out ready to sign a contract and give you the cash. So I think sales sometimes is unfair with their expectations around what can be delivered to them. And I think marketing sometimes can be misaligned in terms of what sales need to get from them. And so this disconnect between MQLs and SQLs is very much at the heart of why lead nurture programs often don't get the love that they need or the attention and budget that they need, because there is a foundational level of misalignment there.
I'd love to hear your definition of a sales qualified lead, and then the role that you see marketing playing in creating sales qualified leads. I actually, like a year ago, did a meme, and I hired a cartoonist, and it was a CMO at his desk, and he was looking at a big stack of all the MQLs and throwing them over the wall. Literally, a year ago, I did that. It got a really good play on LinkedIn. But so, what is your definition of an SQL? And then what is marketing's role in helping create the SQL?
Sure. My definition of an SQL is, of course, not as important as each individual's company's definition, which can vary. But to give you a broad brush view of what I would class as an MQL, it is a matrixed view of a lead. In other words, an SQL should be in some way ready to buy within a reasonable period of time. So there is a level of, are they engaged? Are they wanting to have a conversation with us about a challenge that they have that we can solve? And they have to be, so that's the kind of engagement piece of the matrix, but they also have to be a fit with our ideal customer profile, right? So if you are an organization that only sells to, I'll give you a real life example with a marketing leader that I worked with, right? The organization had made a decision that they would only sell to D2C and e-commerce brands, okay? But we got a ton of inbound interest from agencies. And this marketing leader lobbied every quarter for us to loosen the definition so that we could include agencies because it would massively ramp up the MQL, but we couldn't sell to them. So in that case, no matter how engaged the agency was on the one vector, they were not within our ICP, and therefore they wouldn't have been an SQL, right? Immediately disqualified. A very common framework that many people use to help with base level SQL qualification is BANT. Right? You've probably heard of it on podcasts before, but BANT stands for budget, is there money? Is there a pot of money to solve for this problem? Authority. So are you speaking to someone with some level of influence or power within the organization? Need. Again, have they indicated that there is a pressing problem right now? And timing, right? Do they want to try and solve it within X period of time? Now, you can't get all of those without having an actual conversation, but you can have plenty of proxy measures within your systems that tell you this is probably a BANT qualified lead. And that's where I would talk about an SQL.
I love that. I think we should just change the definition from SQL to a BANT qualified lead. That makes it very simple. So here's the thing that I think is interesting. You brought up there the very definition of an ICP. Misalignment between sales and marketing and the definition of what an ICP is one major issue. There is an underlying major issue below that I would love to get your opinion on. And I've had the good fortune to talk to over 160 different B2B C-suite executives on this podcast. And I run this by them all the time. And so I'd love to get your point of view on it because they don't have your perspective. But my perspective is that we have a very high degree of familiarity with our ICP, but we don't have a high degree of deep understanding of our ICP. And there's many layers that go into that, but we tend to talk to our ICP and learn from our ICP within the bandwidth of what we can do for them. But their challenges and their pain points are out here. Talking to them here is a vendor. Talking to them out here is a partner, a consultant, a peer. And that's the value-added selling. That's the Gartner Trusted Advisor sales methodology. What's your opinion on this idea of whether we have a deep familiarity or do we really truly have a deep understanding of our ICP?
Yeah, I think from what I've observed working with many organizations is your observation is true on the whole in that we have familiarity. And the way I would describe that is most good sales organizations and marketing organizations would be able to tell you their definition of an ICP. Not everyone, sadly, but most at least would be able to say, okay, our ICP is this type of industry, this size of headcount. Maybe they can talk a little bit about these are the types of common challenges that they have. They operate in these geographies and so on. So it is a firmographic understanding of their ICP, which is familiar. You can identify them, but do you deeply, truly understand them? Correct. Most do not, because we don't spend enough time speaking to and listening directly to those prospects and those customers. We don't walk in their shoes. We can't develop the level of empathy necessary to truly understand their challenges and context. And that's why truly great salespeople are exceptional, because they have an incredible way. Sometimes it's purely natural. Sometimes it is built through process to get under the skin of a prospect and empathetically, through curiosity, understand what it is that person cares about. And to your point, sometimes what they care about isn't the surface stuff, right? They know how to peel back the layers of the onion and actually find sometimes quite personal motivations for why they would want to get this deal done that would never be uncovered by your top level firmographic ICP characteristics.
Fascinating, like small world kind of stuff. An extension of what we're talking about here, another CMO said this really well. The context behind it, though, is that McKinsey did a study about 2 years ago that looked at both B2C and B2B companies and that were highly profitable, biggest return on shareholder value. And the number one differentiator across all 400 of those companies was CX, customer experience, right? And so this B2B CMO, he said, here's the way I think about this, Steve. He said, that is a competitive advantage that we haven't had before. We've relied on product and service and price as kind of like the bastions of competitive advantage, right? He said, but I can create a competitive advantage around CX. And the way that I do that, if I know my customers better than my competition, I'll create a better customer experience, which is the number one competitive advantage today. So here's my question to you. How much do we need to refocus our efforts as a company sales, marketing, customer success on really understanding that customer, not here.
I really believe all the great storied businesses during their most successful phases were obsessed with the customer. My favorite example of this is Amazon and Jeff Bezos. All of his executive meetings and his board meetings, they would have an empty chair. And that was the customer's chair. It was a physical reinforcement that the customer is always sat round the highest level executive decisions. And I just love that. And just how customer obsessed they were, and look how well they've done. Now, there's always antithetical examples as well. I genuinely believe, and I think this is even more so in the world of AI and the tech innovations that are sweeping through the market. If you can genuinely understand your customers better than your competition, maybe even sometimes better than themselves, you will be at a significant competitive advantage. And yet, it's not easy, right? And that's partly why there's a competitive advantage. It's quite easy to write down a bunch of firmographic information and say, this is our ICP. To really understand what drives and motivates someone, to really understand their context, takes a real amount of effort.
And, if we don't make that extra effort, here's what our competitors are doing. They have sales teams that are talking to the peers who we're trying to sell to too, right? And within a sales environment, there is a tremendous amount that we can learn. But that's still an environment where there's a shield up. That prospect's being sold to. This isn't an opportunity to divulge the greater pain points and issues and challenges. And most of the time, now this will drive you crazy as a 4-time B2B CRO. I think it was Gong had a study of thousands and thousands of sales calls. And the sales reps talk 2/3 to 3/4 of the time. Like, you would never drive and design and drive a deep customer learning program through an existing business process that was set up to do something different. Same thing for customer success. They're putting out fires, they're answering questions, and they're trying to cross-sell and upsell, right?
Yeah.
That's their mantra, right? The data is fantastic, but how do we have these conversations that are open, that aren't skewed towards a traditional business process that every single one of our competitors are already doing? They're doing the same thing, right? They're learning the same stuff that we are through those processes. So I guess my ultimate question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, let's just put it this way. How important is it that we get out of our traditional processes and that we actually find new ways to learn deeply about the very customers that we're trying to create, the prospects that we're trying to reach out to? 1, it's not important at all. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. 10, we really got to do something different. Where do we fall there and why?
So I'd love to give you a very easy answer, but so let me give you something that's not too nuanced, right? I'm going to bucket it very broadly into 2 stages of business. Okay. If you're an earlier stage startup, and I'm talking a few million in revenue, maybe up to 10, 20 million, Series A, early Series B, that type of size, your whole, like your entirety should be focused on 10 out of 10 being completely customer obsessed, right? Do things that don't scale, break the rule books, think through everything from a first principles perspective. Because if you are taking off the shelf processes, frameworks, best practices that have been handed down to you from other businesses that have already made it, and you're listening to them on podcasts like this or from books that you've read, that is available to all of your competitors. And if you are executing the same playbook in the same way, do you know what? You're going to end up with roughly the same results, right? The regression to the mean, right? Do you know what happens to average companies in VC-backed businesses? They go bust, right? So you have to break the mold. So it should be 10 out of 10 important. Now, that doesn't necessarily scale. And this is me being a little bit cynical. So you might have listeners just completely disagreeing with me. But there has to come a point when having the whole business just do whatever they can to be customer obsessed starts to break down a little bit, and you do have to put in playbooks and processes. And There's always room for innovation, but you start to have to coalesce around some kind of consistency and repeatability. And some of that will come at the expense of maybe being exceptionally customer orientated in every situation. And sales is the best example of this, right? If you just have a nice chat with your customers on every sales call and you take the conversation wherever it wants to go, regardless of whether or not they will or won't buy from you, you might learn a lot, but you're going to build up a very expensive sales team that doesn't close an awful lot. And you're going to become quite inefficient. So I think it goes from 10 out of 10 to 8 out of 10, right? But at no point should it drop below, 6, 7 out of 10, because that is when you've gone too far the other way. You're obsessed with process. You're obsessed with, honestly, bureaucracy and efficiency for the sake of efficiency. And a competitor who is much more customer obsessed will come and eat your lunch.
What you're saying here is you brought it up yourself. Amazon is probably the role model for customer obsessed, right? And no company says we're not customer obsessed. We're not customer focused. Everybody is, right? It's but really where you put your actions behind your words. And they're one of the world's largest companies. But I had the privilege of interviewing an executive at Amazon on the podcast. And that still holds true today. That might be a virtual chair at a virtual meeting, right? But they are still 100% customer success. So to your point, even as big as you get, don't let it get below an 8, right? Like understanding your customer, they're complex and they're always changing. The minute you take your eye off the ball, your competitors aren't. I have one last question to ask for you and a brief answer, because we've covered a lot of territory here today. If there was one thing that you wanted people to take away, the executives, the C-suite executives that are watching today, what would you want them to take away from this podcast?
Oh, great question. Okay, brief answer. I'll give 2 takeaways. One is, please make sure at a foundational level, you have good sales and marketing alignment in that they agree on shared targets, shared definitions. If marketing succeeds, that genuinely means sales succeeds and vice versa, because I still see too many organizations fundamentally hobbled by having that misalignment at a KPI and metrics level. And then the second piece is, of course, where we started the conversation, you are sitting, I guarantee you are sitting on a gold mine in your lead nurture that you are not touching, you are not unlocking. It is free cash sitting at you, staring you in the face, and it is being ignored. So go and have a look at your lead nurture programs. You might think it's super tactical. It might not have been touched for quarters or years. Go and have a look and think how much money is sat in there where we are simply not doing a very good job of nurturing these leads today that could be clients tomorrow.
I love it. So here's one thing that I know is going to happen. People are going to have questions, or they're going to want to reach out and talk to you more. Would it be appropriate if I gave a link to your LinkedIn profile so people could reach out to you?
Please do. Yes, I would love to hear from folks. Anyone that wants to speak about revenue alignment, or in this particular case, improving your lead nurture programs, I'd be happy to talk, and in a very consultative way too.
Fantastic. Mark, thank you. Thank you so much. The mission behind this podcast is to bring different perspectives from different C-suite executives from all over the world. And how do we create growth? How do we create long-term sustainable growth? There's not one way to do it. So thank you for contributing to that conversation today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Steve. Appreciate you having me on.